A reading from Jeremiah. The Lord rules over all. He says to me, who can I speak to? Who can I warn? Who will even listen to me? Their ears are closed, so they can't hear. The Lord's message displeases them. They don't take any delight in it. But the Lord's anger burns inside me. I can no longer hold it in. The Lord tells the people of Judah, stand where the roads cross and look around. Ask where the old paths are. Ask for the good path and walk on it. Then your hearts will find rest in me. But you said, we won't walk on it. I appointed prophets to warn you. I said, listen to the sound of the trumpets. But you said, we won't listen. So pay attention, you nations. You are witnesses for me. Watch what will happen to my people. They have not listened to my words. They have said no to my law. What do I care about incense from the land of Sheba? Why should I bother with sweet-smelling cane from a land far away? I do not accept your burnt offerings. Your sacrifices do not please me. This is dark stuff. And if you're wondering how I came to choose Jeremiah as the prophet I'd preach on this Lent, I'll tell you. I chose last. The whole book is like this. So I'm just going to read a few illustrative section headers from my Bible's book of Jeremiah. Israel is shameless. Sorrow for the doomed nation. Impending destruction. Sword, famine, and pestilence. There's the people plead for mercy, closely followed by the sequel, the Lord will not relent. Dark, dark stuff. And I hesitate even to present it here. This God, this angry God, feels foreign to me. We don't talk about God's anger or judgment a lot in this church, and frankly, I'm always wary of religious people who use God's anger to try to tell me how to live better. So to be clear, I'm not here to do that. That's not the purpose of this sermon. I'm here to propose a thought experiment for Lent, but we'll get to that in a second. I chose this dark passage because as long as we're here to talk about Jeremiah this season, let's not try to smooth off the rough edges of his prophecy. Let's not ignore the tone of this book. Jeremiah is a doom and gloom prophet. He preached from about 605 BC to 585 BC during a time of enslavement. He preached during the Babylonian siege of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. These were dark times. Reading this doom and gloom prophet, reading Jeremiah helped me understand more about what being a prophet is and why prophets are so important, why prophets are the theme that we've chosen for Lent, especially during this time. So I'm struck by a few things in this reading. First, I'm struck by how much Jeremiah hates his job. Woe is me, my mother, that you have borne me, he says. I am a man of strife and of contention to the whole earth. Everyone curses me. He takes no delight in delivering this news to his friends and his peers, to his leaders. He does not feel smug. He feels despair. It's like he's carrying the weight of the world on his back, and God often needs to speak to him, to re-infuse him with the courage to keep spreading this message. I'm also struck that the audience Jeremiah is preaching to is general, as it is with many of the prophets. Though Jeremiah advised the leaders of his day, God was not angry only at Jehoiakim or Jehoahaz or Zedekiah. Thank you, Wikipedia. God's message, his judgment was for every person, those with great power and those with no power. I have a feeling that, like most groups of people, like most nations, if you actually laid out the actions of every single person, some people's lists of transgressions would stretch out a little bit longer than others. But there's no mention here of distinguishing between those with 71 sins last year versus those with 3,008. The temple is destroyed for everyone. Everyone is enslaved. All of Jerusalem is sieged. And when I think about our modern day prophets and our modern day national or global transgressions, I think there are parallels. The one that struck me most immediately is climate change. Like, if we line everyone up in this church and measure each person's carbon footprint or water usage, I'm sure that some people here would get A+, and some people would get "See Me" written in red with about 5 underlines underneath. But when the water runs out, it will run out for all of us. It doesn't matter how faithfully you composted. Your reward will not be determined by your effort. We will save ourselves as one people, or we will perish as one people. There's no individual extra credit. And this is an important concept to consider and to pray about this season. The traditional purpose of Lent is to give us a chance to prepare ourselves and to, I'm using some heavy language that's sort of meant to feel uncomfortable, to purify ourselves through prayer, through penance, through atonement and almsgiving and self-denial. But I worry that this preparation process or purification process, if it's individual only, if we're only thinking of our own salvation or our own souls, I worry that it's just not enough. And it reminds me of this amazing book, The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. I know some of you have probably read it. To those of you who haven't, I actually can't in good faith recommend this book to you because it's one of these Russian affairs where there are like 40 characters and all of them have about 5 different names and each name is 15 letters long, and the plot doesn't really get going until like page 70. But it's a really good book about God. And one of the themes in this book is responsibility. There is only one salvation for you, one of the characters in the book says. Take yourself up and make yourself responsible for all the sins of all people. For indeed it is so, my friend. And the moment you make yourself sincerely responsible for everything and everyone, you will see at once that it is really so, that it is you who are guilty on behalf of all and for all. Whereas by shifting your own laziness or powerlessness onto others, you will end up sharing in Satan's pride and murmuring against God. So it's a really fun book. But I think this passage is a fascinating thought experiment, a fascinating Lenten challenge, if you're feeling ready for a challenge, if giving up chocolate isn't really doing it for you this year. It's challenging you to change your framing of salvation, of sin, of responsibility, and to go against a couple of really strong human and cultural impulses. The first impulse that you'll be resisting is individualism. This desire, when surrounded by people whose intentions or competence we don't quite trust, to go into our own corner and do our own thing, and believe sincerely that as long as we don't cause harm to other people, that's enough. As long as we're carbon neutral, as long as we don't say something overtly racist, or as long as we give money to the church every week, hey, we're doing our part. Lenten challenge framing is that individual salvation is no salvation at all. The second impulse is harder to resist. Resisting it is the step that comes after believing that we're all in this together. And resisting it is going to hurt a little bit. The impulse is, well, from the time we're little kids, we tend to get really defensive about accepting blame for anything. especially something we don't think we did. We can get a little obsessed with finding out whose fault something is and shouting, hands raised, not my fault, she did it. Or sometimes we grow up and become a little more enlightened and say, it doesn't really matter whose fault it is, but it's not my fault, she did it. And I see a lot of this happening right now on my Facebook feed with the election and with other current events. We see a political movement that frightens us, or a current event that disgusts us, and we look around. We look for a person to point at, to direct our rage at. We want someone to get fired, or Twitter shamed, or indicted. And maybe these things should happen. But when we call for something like that, does it alleviate our own responsibility in the matter? Oh, how it helps us take 10 steps away from the ostracized individual and feel like we're in the circle that the light shines on. But if we're all in this together, the light shines on all of us or on none of us. So, Lenten challenge. What if instead of running away from responsibility, we ran toward it arms open with such gusto that we grabbed all the responsibility and faultedness that we could find and bore it on our hearts? What if we ran to problems and said, that's my fault, that's my responsibility? Of course, this isn't an end in and of itself. Feeling bad about something never made the problem go away, but I think these mindset shifts, to use a sort of jargony description, or these different ways of thinking about sin and salvation, that we're all in this together, and that I, as an individual, am responsible for all the sins and the sins of all. That this mindset shift has the power to be transformative. If you engage with it, you might be surprised at the changes that can occur. So as you prepare for Easter, this Lent, listen for God's voice, not just the consoling whisper, but the sound of trumpets. Listen for what delights you and what does not delight you. Look for the good path and walk on it. That's what I'm trying to do, to find that good path. I'm trying to get away from that burnt offerings path, those small individual gifts to signal my personal piety or deservedness. Maya Angelou said, no one of us can be free until everyone is free. And I'm saying maybe no one of us can be saved unless we're all saved. Amen.